You hear government shutdown on the news, and it can feel like this distant political thing, right? But the effects are so real. So let's get into what a shutdown actually is, who it really impacts, and how this whole thing could affect you. So, October 1st rolls around, the deadline comes and goes, and nothing. Congress couldn't reach a deal on the new funding bills, so the government's legal authority to spend money, well, it just expired. It's kind of like a subscription lapsing, but, for the entire federal government. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because this isn't just about politics in D.C. It has real, tangible consequences for everyone. So let's dive in and see what actually closes, what surprisingly stays open, and how we even got to this point. Okay, so how do we even get here? To really get what a shutdown is, we've got to talk about one key idea: appropriations. I know it sounds super technical, but stick with me, it's actually pretty simple. Imagine the entire government budget is split into 12 different buckets of money, for different departments. Congress has to approve each one of those. If they don't get it done by the October 1st deadline, the government's legal permission to spend that money just evaporates. And without that legal green light, all so-called non-essential operations are required by law to stop. All right, this is where it really starts to hit home for a lot of people. What's actually open and what's closed? Well, it all comes down to one really important distinction. So who decides? Basically, lawyers inside each government agency have to figure out what's essential. And essential pretty much means anything needed to protect life, safety, property, or national security. If it fits that bill, it stays open. Everything else, it gets put on hold. And the impact is immediate and honestly pretty widespread. Thinking about a trip to a national park? Yeah, that's probably not happening. Need to get a passport or a visa? You're looking at some serious delays. And that's just the stuff you see. Behind the scenes, things like environmental inspections, new loans for small businesses, they just grind to a halt. Okay, but what about the stuff that has to keep running? I mean, we need air traffic control, right? Well, here's the crazy part. Take a look at this list. Yes, the TSA agents are at the airport. The military is on duty. Social security checks are still getting sent out. But look at that little note in parentheses, unpaid. That's the catch. So many of these absolutely essential workers are legally required to show up to their jobs, but they aren't getting a paycheck. And that right there, that brings us to the real human side of all this political maneuvering. Because this isn't just about services being on or off. It's about the people, hundreds of thousands of them, who actually do these jobs. Just look at that number. Over 800,000 people. Let that sink in for a second. That's how many federal workers are directly impacted. You've got folks who are furloughed, basically sent home with no pay. And then you have all those essential workers we just talked about who are forced to work without pay. And this quote from the head of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association just says it all, doesn't it? He says, yeah, we'll probably get back pay, eventually. But that does absolutely nothing for families trying to make rent or buy groceries right now. A promise for money later doesn't pay the bills today. He's talking about a law that was passed back in 2019. It basically guarantees that federal employees will get retroactive pay once the shutdown is over, so they will get that money back. But again, that doesn't solve the problem of having an empty bank account in the middle of all this. So you might be wondering, how on earth does it get to this point? I mean, a government shutdown of this size doesn't just happen by accident, right? It's what happens when you have a massive political disagreement and neither side is willing to give an inch. So what was the big fight about this time? Well, it really boiled down to one major disagreement. On one side, the Democrats wanted to make sure that the funding bill also included a permanent extension for certain healthcare tax credits. But on the other side, Republicans were saying, nope, let's pass a clean bill first. That's a temporary funding thing called a continuing resolution. And then we can argue about the healthcare stuff later. And, well, neither side blinked. And you can see that argument laid out pretty clearly in this quote from the America First Policy Institute. Their whole point was, hey, let's just pass a clean, temporary funding bill to keep the lights on. Let's not let the whole government shut down over these other policy debates. And then, on the flip side, you get this perspective. This quote from the Association of Mature American Citizens frames the whole thing completely differently. They're basically saying that Democrats were holding government funding hostage to push through their own policy demands, which they saw as totally unrelated to the budget itself. Okay, so setting aside the politics and the he said, she said for a moment, there's a much bigger price tag to all of this, a huge economic cost that affects the entire country. Get ready for this number, $7
billion. That's the estimated hit to the U.S. economy for every single week the government stays shut down. We're talking lost wages, government contracts that just disappear, and this huge ripple effect that hits private businesses that depend on the government running smoothly.
And the damage goes way beyond just that number. A shutdown just injects this massive dose of uncertainty into the economy. It makes consumers nervous, businesses pull back, and, this is a big one, it stops the release of really important economic data. Things like the monthly inflation reports. The Federal Reserve, the markets, they all need that data to make decisions. Without it, it's kind of like everyone's flying blind. So when you take a step back and look at the whole picture, it really leaves you with a pretty big question, right? When shutting down the entire government becomes a regular part of our political playbook, what's the real long-term cost? Not just in dollars, but in our trust in the system. What's the price of governing by crisis?